Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. This episode is brought to you by Airmail Pro, and I'm your host, John Voorhees. I've given Federico the week off. He's off relaxing, not entirely relaxing. He is doing a lot of writing on that iOS and iPadOS review as I speak. But he's taking the week off, and I'm handling this one solo. It's been a really quiet week, and that's also because I'm doing the same thing he is, but with the Mac review. So we have a trio of stories to recap for this week, all brought to you by Ryan Christoffel. So Ryan had a couple of news stories and a bigger story this week from our Summer OS Preview series. And that story is one that is worth checking out because it dives deep into Apple and privacy in 2020 and how privacy touches every aspect of what was announced at WWDC. Ryan does a really good job of bringing it all together, whether it's the Mac, the iPhone, the iPad, and talking about what Apple's trying to accomplish. And, you know, a good example, one that I've had some experience with recently is Maps, because Maps now doesn't need your precise location for everything. You can set it to approximate location, and it works fine. And it does this by, instead of using that really small blue dot that you're used to seeing in the Maps app, it creates a big circle to show kind of where it thinks you are. Now, in Maps, that's not something you necessarily want to turn on because it makes certain features unavailable or difficult to use. And so if, for instance, you were in approximate location mode and you requested turn-by-turn directions, the Maps app would prompt you to go to precise location for that purpose. But you can imagine that there are a lot of apps that need to know roughly where you are, but they don't need to know exactly where you are. And the one that I always think of are events type apps. So maybe, I know people aren't going to a lot of concerts these days, but for those sorts of things, an app that tells you about things in your local area doesn't need to know where your house is. It just needs to know what town or city you're in. So it's that sort of thing where the privacy settings allow you to fine-tune them to a greater degree so you can only provide to the app the level of information that it needs to provide that service. So Ryan talks about that. He talks about all the things coming in Safari and a bunch of other stuff. It's a really great story. Next, I want to round up the two news stories that we had on the site this week. And one is an interesting one to me. It's the rebranding of Beats One, the radio station that's part of an Apple Music subscription. It's now been renamed from Beats One to Apple Music One. And to me, that just makes a lot of sense. Apple Music is a strong brand. It's been with us now for quite a while. Beats still exists in brands of products that Apple sells, the headphones, but it's no longer going to be the name attached to the radio portion of an Apple Music subscription, which, again, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think that the Beats One brand is probably on its way out long term. It's going to be a little longer, I think, with hardware. But if we see, for instance, over-ear headphones with AirPods branding on them, I think that will be the sign that things are going to be switching over to AirPods branding or some other branding from Apple that's other than the Beats One brand. Because I know I just bought some Powerbeats Pro headphones, and I feel like that's the kind of product that eventually Apple will replace in the AirPods lineup. We've got AirPods, we've got AirPods Pro. I think we'll see a sports model at some point. I think we'll see an over-the-ear headphone at some point. And they'll all incorporate a lot of those features that we're coming to be familiar with from the AirPods line. And at that point, I think it makes sense to start phasing out the Beats One brand as that AirPods brand becomes wider and more diverse. All right, the other story this week is that there is an Apple TV channels bundle available now that features a bundling of CBS All Access and Showtime for one low price. If you signed up for those two channels separately, they would cost you just under $21. But with this deal, you can get the two channels for $9.99 together. And that's after a 7-day free trial. I have tried both Showtime and CBS All Access in the past, and I have then unsubscribed from them. And I think, I think they make more sense together than they do apart, because separately, there's some good things there. And it's the kind of subscription that I found worth subscribing to for a short time and then dropping, because I figured there's not enough content there. Once they have some more new stuff, I'll come back later. But I think bundled makes a lot of sense because you get all of CBS's content. There's a lot of unique television content there, as well as Showtime's movies. So I think together those things work together particularly well. And $10 is a good deal for this. I mean, there's a lot between those two services, and it's roughly, it's basically half the price. So, that's something to consider and worth looking at. I know I'm going to be looking at it probably later in the fall once we get past our OS review season. All right, the other thing that happened this week on MacStories is, of course, App Stories, which came out on Monday, and Federico and I did a deep dive on Mac Catalyst. And this was a show where I did a lot of the talking. I mean, Federico has been playing with these apps too, and is very intrigued by what's happening both with Mac Catalyst and on Apple Silicon Macs that are coming later. But this is a story that I've been following closely ever since the sneak peek that Craig Federighi gave in 2018 at WWDC. And so I go into depth about some of the history of where we've been since that very first sneak peek through last year, 2019, when developers first got their hands on the tools to make the first Catalyst apps, and then this year's WWDC, where Apple greatly expanded the available APIs for developers and introduced something that's a completely separate path for Mac Catalyst apps. And it's more work for developers, but if the economics work, the work in putting the app together, I think, makes all the sense in the world, because these look like they're going to be some particularly good apps. Plus, we talk about the fact that Apple seems particularly committed to Mac Catalyst now that they've brought both messages and maps to the Mac in the form of Mac Catalyst apps. That's coming out with Big Sur in the fall. And those are two critical apps that are above and beyond the sorts of apps that were ported before by Apple, which were things like voice memos, stocks, news, home, that sort of thing. All right, so I want to talk about the club too. And Ryan had a really good idea this week, and I've really liked what he came up with. It's both a collection and an essay in our extension section. And what he collected were apps that he wanted to see come from iOS and the iPad to the Mac, because there absolutely are a lot of great apps that all of us at MacStories use all the time that aren't available on the Mac. I know I'm going to probably do a follow-up on this collection at some point with some additional ones that I'd like to see as well, but it's a really nice collection of apps. And for that extension column, Ryan explores kind of the business considerations for bringing an iPad app or an iPhone app to the Mac, and in particular to Apple Silicon Mac. So that's an interesting first look at some of the things that we expect developers will be looking at and deciding whether to make those apps available on Apple Silicon Macs too. I also did the favorite this week, and the favorite is Anybuffer. Anybuffer is a great shelf app. There are a lot of great shelf apps out there. Yoink's another one that I love. Gladys is also excellent. Anybuffer is one that I think we at MacStories have been using more recently to kind of test out and see how it goes. And I've been really impressed. You can set up your own categories for things you want to store in Anybuffer. I use it for things like text snippets, GIFs that I like to share with my friends, PDFs that I share as part of my work at MacStories regularly, contracts that I need to, template contracts that I need to fill out every so often in my work as well. Stuff like that, it's really good for. And I'm trying to keep a relatively limited collection of things so it's easy to find and easy to get at these things and keep down the number of shelves that I create. But right now I've probably got 4 or 5, and it's been really handy. So that's an app worth checking out. And I've got some more detail in the club for that as well. All right, before I get to my Unwind pick, I want to tell you about our sponsor. And our sponsor this week is AirMail Pro. AirMail Pro is one of the most customizable apps that I have ever used on really any of Apple's platforms. but particularly on iOS and iPadOS. It's available on those two platforms, as well as the watch and the Mac. And customization is its greatest strength because not everybody uses email in the same way. And so having the ability to customize it to the way you work is an incredibly big advantage. Of course, this app won an ADA back in, I believe it was 2017, I want to say. But it's got a bunch of modern features. It's got snoozing, it's got a smart unified inbox, scheduling of emails so that you can set up an email to be sent later, and filters, and a whole bunch more. Plus, on top of that, of course, it has all the latest tech built into it for all the platforms. And I particularly like some of the things, the touches that have been added to the iPad version of this app because it supports split screen as well as dark mode, and it's got cursor support, extensive keyboard shortcuts, and even interactive notifications, which is terrific. Plus, it has theming, and there are a number of security features built in to do things like block tracking pixels. Of course, also there are third-party app integrations that make it easy to kind of get information out of your email messages and into things like your task manager. There's calendar integration, and there's an all-new design that was introduced with version 4 of the app. So go check it out. I'll have a link to the app in the show notes, as well as a link to the sponsor post that we had on MacStories this week. Check them out. Great email app, worth checking out if you haven't seen it in a while because it's really come a long way in the last couple of years. Our thanks to Airmail Pro for their support of not only MacStories Unwind, but all of MacStories this week. All right, I want to talk Unwind. And so, it's been a busy summer at MacStories, and I haven't had a lot of time to dedicate to things like picking up a novel or watching lots of movies. But I did pick up another video game this week that I really, really like. I've been on a streak now ever since Animal Crossing came out of playing games that are kind of laid back, relaxing, do it at your own pace type games. And that was very much true of Animal Crossing and of Paper Mario, which I talked about last week. But this week, I want to talk about a really fun, delightful little game called A Short Hike. Now, this game is not brand new, but it is new to the Switch. Nintendo did an Indie World Direct earlier this week that highlighted a bunch of games that were coming out that day or sometime in the future. And this one really caught my eye because this game, although it's been out on other platforms, had kind of escaped my notice so far. And what immediately caught my eye, I guess, were the visuals, I guess. You play as a little bird, and your goal is to get up to the top of a mountain. And it can be done relatively quickly. You can really, you could grind through this probably in an hour, maybe 2 hours. But it's more fun to just kind of do it at a leisurely pace. And even if you do kind of reach the destination and the goal of the game, go back and then just explore, because there's a lot of things, there's collectibles, there's a lot of other characters on the island to meet who have tasks for you to do. And it's all done in a really nice pixelated art style that I really enjoy. The island has a bunch of different areas. You can ride around in a boat on a river. There's kind of like fall scenery, which kind of works really well for this late summer season into fall that we're heading. And I don't know, it's just one of those small games that I've found really delightful. It's won a bunch of awards in the past, and it's on the Switch now. And I feel like games like this are fun to play on both the Switch in handheld mode and on the TV, because the visuals really lend themselves to being on a television. But there's a certain intimacy to the game too, playing it in handheld mode, that I really enjoy. So I've been doing a little bit of both. It's only been out for a couple of days, but I immediately fell in love with it, and I've played with it for, a couple of hours is all. And I plan to be playing this quite a bit through August. I don't know that it's going to last more than a few weeks just because it's a relatively short game. But you know what? It's a fairly inexpensive game too. I think it's $7 US. So this is not like a major investment in time or money for that matter, but it is a lot of fun, and I think that everybody will like it. So if you're a fan of the Nintendo Switch, definitely check out A Short Hike. I'll have both a link in the show notes to the game itself on Nintendo's website and to the trailer, because the trailer, I think, does a very nice job of capturing what this game is all about. All right, everybody, this is a really short episode this week. We had, as I said, a pretty quiet week, but, expect more coming down the pike from us. We've got more coming with the Summer OS series. I know Alex Guillot is working on a story for the series. I've got one coming relatively soon. Ryan has yet another one. And on Monday, just a little preview for you, we've got our next interview for App Stories that's part of the series as well. So check that out. It's, we're kind of ramping all those things up simultaneously as we get towards September. We still don't have a very good feel for when iOS and iPadOS 14 and macOS and watchOS and everything, all the great OSs. We don't really have a good idea when those things are coming out, but they could be coming out relatively soon. So we're getting the series wrapped up over the next few weeks, and we are working hard on all of our reviews, so those will be ready for everyone. And not far around the corner, too, is the Club MacStories anniversary, which comes mid-September. So we'll be doing something special there as well, but I don't want to spoil it yet. All right. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And of course, I will be back with Federico next Friday. Bye.